What is the Curriculum Design Workbench?
Well, it's a tool to help people. That's what it's all about. And basically, it helps people by getting them around a table to have a conversation in a structured way that will help them think in a very whole of course approach. So a whole of course approach is taking those course level learning outcomes as being the main focus and thinking about how you design your degree in a scaffolded way to help get your students to those endpoints. So it's about whole of course, and it's about a collaborative approach, and it's about helping people to do that.
You have a philosophy of assurance of learning, Romy. Is it inbuilt into the Curriculum Design Workbench, or do you think we need to think about other things in conjunction with this?
I would say it's very much built in, and I'd just like to unpack what I think about assurance of learning. I know some people see that phrase and they just think it's about the attainment of the student as they're about to exit, of being able to evidence that they can do those course level learning outcomes. In my view, if you want to assure learning, you actually have to assure that you're developing those skills, that knowledge, that application in your students right from day one. So you do need to have that scaffolded approach, and what this tool does is help you design your curriculum so that you are building your students' abilities throughout, so that when they come to those endpoints, they are capable. We're not just finding out at the last minute, oh dear, they weren't performing as well as we would have hoped at that course learning outcome in, say, a capstone subject. We're looking at how they're doing throughout the whole of the degree.
What is the underlying design philosophy of the Curriculum Design Workbench?
The underlying philosophy is about whole of course. So often we decide what we want our courses to look like and have course level learning outcomes, and then they get divided out to units and people work in isolation in these little silos. They do great jobs in isolation, but we never get this really nice degree programme, or quite often we don't. The students don't see how things connect together. They don't see how they can build and progress through. So this is all about thinking about it in a much more holistic way of taking those course level learning outcomes as your main focus and developing a scaffolded approach to make sure that we get students where we need them to be by the end of their degree.
How does the tool help with curriculum design overall?
Well, what it does is it makes you think about what are those course level learning outcomes? What is it that you want your students to be able to do on graduation? And then it makes you think based on those all the way through, well, what would they look like? How would we make judgments about how well students do those things? How would we actually assess those things? What would an authentic assessment to meet those course level learning outcomes look like? What kind of learning activities do we want to do to prepare our students to be able to succeed in these assessment tasks? And in that way, you're constructively aligning your curriculum in a way that's feeding towards those course level learning outcomes.
From a course design point of view, how does the Curriculum Design Workbench help with constructive alignment?
Well, what it does is it stages the process for you. And as I say, it's all about collaboration. It actually puts the mapping into the last phase of it. So as a whole course development team, you're discussing about what your course needs to look like, how you can scaffold the assessment tasks, the learning activities, in order to get your students from entry to be able to actually achieve those course learning outcomes at the end. So it's having that discussion all the way through in these different stages. And it's only when you've actually decided as a team that actually this is what we want to assess, this is how we're going to assess it, this is how we're going to teach our students in that constructively aligned way, that then you say, okay, so where should these different things be happening? That's when the final stage of mapping to the units occurs. So it's really holding off the mapping stage until there's that agreement to have that scaffolded course learning approach.
How important is a team approach to the Curriculum Design Workbench?
To me, that's the most important thing. If you decide not to use the workbench and you use a collaborative approach, that would be more important than the tool. The tool is there to facilitate the collaboration. So that is really important. And the important part of that is for this whole of degree design. So people who are teaching in the first year understand where their units are going to lead people into the future. People who are teaching in the latter years understand what the students have already gone through. People who have set assignments that are to do with a course learning outcome can give feedback or feed forward that will actually help the students when they get to the next example of that course learning outcome. It's that scaffolded approach, and unless you're having a team conversation and all getting around the table, you're just not going to get that kind of whole of degree feel to your programme.
How do you use the Curriculum Design Workbench?
And the main use of it is sitting around a table. I would strongly say to people, don't try and get a member of professional staff to start filling in all the details for you and using it in that way as a review tool. I really think you should set off by having everyone sitting around the table of actually having the discussion. Yes, you might have some materials that you've used before. Yes, you might have your course learning outcomes you've already worked on, or assessments that you have used previously that you might want to bring along that you can cut and paste into the tool. But it's about, from day one, of people having that joint conversation.
How do you use the Curriculum Design Workbench to begin with? What preparation is required?
The course learning outcomes are really what's going to help shape your curriculum design, and getting those right is absolutely essential. So it might be that you're writing them from fresh if it's a new course, or it might be that you're reviewing ones that you've currently got. So the first stage that the tool asks you to do is actually say, okay, what are your course learning outcomes? What are the things that you think that the student should be able to do by the end? There's various check lists in there, so you can ask yourselves questions about whether they're right. There's also a chance for you to do a kind of compliance matrices, so you can say, okay, well, I'm teaching at a bachelor's, is this meeting what AQF level 7 is actually expecting me to, or level 9 if it was masters, and so on. I might also have a professional body, I can put those in, and do my course learning outcomes align to these things? Am I covering off what I need to do for the different bodies? And if you've got that right, and if you've got those compliances all aligned, then you know that you can base the rest of your design around your course learning outcomes, because they're doing what you need them to do.
I understand that using the Curriculum Design Workbench occurs over 5 stages. Stage 1, course learning outcomes. Stage 2, the course level rubrics. Stage 3, assessment. Stage 4, learning activities. And Stage 5, mapping. Can you please describe for us each of those stages?
Yeah, the next stage is when you actually say to the team, again, still around the table, well, what do those course learning outcomes actually look like? And this is where you're bringing in the kind of idea of the assessment rubrics. And assessment rubrics have both criteria and standards to them. But rather than thinking about an assessment rubric for an individual task, what you're doing is you're writing a whole of course rubric based around each of your course learning outcomes. So as a team, you actually decide what you think the criteria are that you're looking for someone to be showing you that course learning outcome. You then start thinking about what the different standards would be at the different stages of the degree. So in a 3-year undergraduate course, you might be writing that these are my criteria, and at first year, by the end of first year, I expect as a minimum for students to be able to do these things. By second year, to be able to do these things, and by third year, these things. You've got this agreed criteria and standards around it. Then when an individual unit gets assigned that course learning outcome, they can go back to that whole of course rubric and say, okay, so I'm doing course learning outcome 1, this is the rubric, I'm operating at a second year stage, so I know that in order for students to pass, they have to be doing these things as a minimum. And they use that language that students then become familiar with, that there's the same judgments being made around the same areas for everyone all the way. It's got the continuity, it's got that standardisation. It doesn't mean that academics can't have academic freedom. They can obviously add additional things to their own assessment task rubrics, but it just means around the course learning outcomes, you get that consistency going on and people understand where they're trying to get to. The next stage, once you know what you want the course learning outcomes to look like, what the standards are, is to think about, well, what's the best way of assessing that? What kind of things should we be getting the students to do to show us they can meet these standards, to show us that they can demonstrate the different criteria? And so we have to start designing assessment. But again, it's a collaborative process. It's not individuals going back and doing it within their individual units. And so it's thinking about, well, what would be an authentic way that a student would be able to show that they're doing these things? What would the expectation be if they were in industry, in the profession? And then tailoring that into an assessment task that can work within the university context. It's really good to brainstorm all those kind of different assessment tasks and then look at how you can build them over time. So an example might be, if you've got a course learning outcome about a student being able to be an effective problem solver, for a first year, you might be just asking them to do quite a simple problem. You might give them all the data. You might just have one stakeholder that they're trying to work with. So they're still doing effective problem solving, but it's in quite a simplistic format. You might then build that by second year by saying, okay, well, let's have multiple stakeholders going on. Let's only give them a portion of the data and they have to do some research inquiry themselves. By third year, we might be hitting a real world problem, a wicked problem. You don't give them any data, that they're having to find the data themselves. There's no real answers, they're just having to look through possible solutions. So you can scaffold that kind of assessment that's very authentic, but is very much targeting the course level learning outcome throughout the whole of the degree. The last stage then is to think about, well, how do we teach our students to be able to do these things? It's no use just setting an assessment and hoping they can do it. We actually need to help develop the skills. So what kind of learning activities do we need to embed throughout the degree programme to help the students develop, to be able to achieve the different assessment tasks that we're setting for them? And then once we've done all that, we've aligned what we want them to do, how we assess it, how we're going to teach them, then we go and say, well, where should this fit within our curriculum? Which units best fit these different assessment tasks and learning activities?
What are the benefits and value of using the Curriculum Design Workbench when designing and mapping a curriculum?
Well, I would say I think you get a better curriculum at the end of it. And that's what's most important. It's going to maximise your student success, because they're really going to, as a result of this, have this shared understanding of what you're trying to achieve. Both the students will have that understanding and your academics. So everyone's on the same page. And in order to make that happen, you then have this very nice scaffolded approach to how your curriculum is actually taught and experienced by your students. There is also a byproduct of it in that it's actually going to help you meet what you need to be doing. Legislation actually says that we need to be able to evidence that students are meeting these course learning outcomes. So by designing in that way, you've got a natural pathway and you'll be able to collect evidence to show that students are achieving. But that's a byproduct. The important thing is that it's just good educational practice.
You've described the Curriculum Design Workbench as something that can be used to design a curriculum. Can it also be used to identify gaps in a curriculum?
Yeah, of course it can. If you're starting from fresh, then obviously you can just use the tool as it is and use it to help develop. But if you've already got some curriculum in place, then you can cut and paste, put those things in, and then ask yourself the questions that the different stages pose to see whether or not it's right and whether or not you do need to make amendments to what you've been doing previously.
We've talked about the Curriculum Design Workbench from a course level. How does it work from a practical point of view or for unit coordinators?
So I would expect the unit coordinators to be part of that bigger conversation. It's really important, in fact. The collaboration isn't just a top level collaboration and then unit coordinators are told you're doing this, you're doing that. It has to be agreed. It has to have that empowerment level so that people have actually decided this is what it looks like. But once the agreement's there and you've done the mapping, then you would know as a unit coordinator that you've got course learning outcome 2 and that you're going to do this assessment task and that there are these learning activities. Those are the things that now has been agreed fit well within your unit, you still have freedom to develop whatever else you need within your unit that fits the rest of your topic area. So there is still the academic freedom there for you to work. And in fact, the tool at the moment only looks at the course level, but the next iteration of the tool is going to then provide a platform for that continuation, for that development, for the units, so it can all be collated together.
How often should course learning outcomes be renewed? And how often should we review a curriculum?
I think, how long's a piece of string? I wouldn't want to say you have to do it this often. But I think what our mentality should be around it is they're not set in stone, they're not forever. Things change in the world, industry's changing, the profession's changing, what we learn in research and academia is changing all the time. So in that way, we have to constantly go back and look at our course learning outcomes and ask ourselves, are they still right? So it should be a dynamic, ongoing process.
Do you have any other comments you'd like to add about the Curriculum Design Workbench or Assurance of Learning?
Well, the assurance of learning can't just be that endpoint. It has to be looking at how, from day one, when the students enter the university, we can help develop them to be able to achieve. And that's what we're assuring. We're assuring that they learn in order to then evidence their achievement. And I really believe in order to do this, we need that whole of course design approach where we're looking at what those course level learning outcomes are and we can scaffold it throughout. And the only way to do that is if we get together and have the conversations together. So the collaboration is key.